Are you searching for the best in online black radio? Then go to blacktalkradionetwork.com, helping you filter through the noise. Real talk, black talk.
The internet is full of half-truths and all-out lies. We've all seen them, and many people on social media complaining about it. Here's your chance to show and prove. WorldAfropedia.com is a black-owned and operated encyclopedia. There are several thousand articles, but we need help. We can't uncover all the truth ourselves. So please, join us and become a writer, editor, or blogger for WorldAfropedia.com today. Every little bit counts. We owe it to the future generations to put the truth out there. Visit WorldAfropedia.com, the African-centered encyclopedia, a global database of African knowledge for the purpose of bringing about global African wisdom and understanding. WorldAfropedia.com.
So may as well start over, right? From the Indians who welcomed the pilgrims, yes, into the buffaloes that once ruled the plain. Like the vultures circling beneath the dark clouds, looking for the rain. Well, and been looking for the rain. Just like city that stagger on the coastline, living in a nation that just can't take much more. Like the forest they buried beneath the highway, I never had a chance to grow. Well, I never had a chance to grow. And now it's winter. It's winter in America. It's a time when all of the healers done been killed or been betrayed. Yes, people know it's winter. It's winter in America. The truth is there ain't nobody fighting because, well, nobody knows what to say. Brother, save your soul. Winter in America. And the Constitution was a noble piece of paper in which free society will struggle but they died in vain. And now democracy is ragtime on the corner, unemployed, hoping that it rains. Well, they've been hoping for some rain. And I see the robins perched in barren treetops. They're watching the last-ditch races go marching across the floor. And like the peace signs that vanished in our dreams and never had a chance to grow. Well, they never had a chance to grow. If somebody want to know, tell them it's winter. Does it feel like a winter in America? It's a time when all of the healers, people who could help us, done been killed. They've been betrayed. Yes, people know it's something wrong. Feels just like winter. It's winter in America. The truth is there ain't nobody fighting because, well, nobody knows what to say. The sisters save our babies. Winter in America. And now it's winter. To feel like winter in America. Yes, time when all of the healers, brothers who could help us, done been killed. They put them in jails. Yeah, people know it's something wrong. Everybody ought to know winter. It seems like winter in America. The truth is there ain't nobody fighting because, well, nobody knows what to say. The truth is there ain't nobody fighting because, well, nobody knows what to do. Truth is there ain't nobody fighting because nobody knows what to say.
Context of White Supremacy. Gus T Renegade in for another broadcast, hopefully to share constructive information on the system of white supremacy. Today's date, Friday, July 21st, 2017. So I have been told this is our 7th and final study session on Gil Scott-Heron's autobiography, The Last Holiday, a memoir. That was A Winter in America. In fact, if folks saw Stanley Nelson's documentary on the Black Panther Party, I think it came out in 2000, or it was premiered on PBS in 2016. They used Winter in America, and that particular version, the Gil Scott-Heron solo version, they played that to great effect, in my opinion, in that documentary. That said, we will wrap it up today. Final segment, Gil Scott-Heron's The Last Holiday, picking up on Chapter 37, Context of White Supremacy. 37. I suppose that as long as we live, Stevie Wonder will call me Aries, but only when it's appropriate, like at night after a show at a group gathering in somebody's hotel space. There was a game the members of Wonder Love seemed to set up with Stevie. The door to a back room was closed. Stevie would have a seat beyond the room's double beds, and the group members would sit along the walls and on the beds, quietly, holding conversations with people near them, waiting. To near silence, I opened the door, an unsuspecting party seeker, and threw a freezing rope that fell on the shoulders of the occupants. I saw Stevie in a straight-backed chair leaning toward me with a half smile. There was an empty second in a room full of expectation, and then Stevie pulled himself erect and shouted, "Aries." And everybody laughed and clapped and looked at me like a pickpocket with his hand caught in a mousetrap. I never knew how he did that, and I never asked him because I always thought I would figure it out. And it wasn't as though I gave up there, threw my hands up in disgust, and vowed to change my aftershave. I was not born on April 1st, 30 years before this get-together for the future amusement of Wonderlove. I got caught because somebody whispered my name, and I knew Stevie could hear a fly pissing on a piece of cotton down the block. Just wait until next time, I thought. The next time was less than 2 weeks later. A similar situation. It was after a concert, and all the band and crew rooms were in the one hotel. I wasn't sure that things were arranged until I was directed toward the back of a suite by a grinning Calvin. I nodded my understanding and, taking no chances at all, I tiptoed with rubber soles on carpet up to a door that I inspected with suspicion. I had a plan. With a quick wrist flick, I twisted my way in and put a finger against my lips to the group as I shut the door behind me. My expression said, "Nobody breathe." Stevie was stunned. He'd been quicked, and he knew it. He was sitting up straight, and his head was rotating slowly like a gyroscope. I was watching for breathers, but then, with his face to the ceiling, he grinned my way and shouted, "Aries." I don't know what to tell you about that. It was probably the time I should have asked him how he knew it was me. After a while, however, I started to feel like a guy waiting backstage for a magician to ask him about his performance. They were not telling, and I shouldn't be asking. I took a glass of punch somebody offered and a seat on the bed next to Stevie, clapping him on the shoulder. The room had resumed a party's volume. Music, teasing, guys and girls who had become close friends on the road or maintained relationships over the hundreds of highways were telling each other secrets. Stevie was humming something and tapping the table in front of him like a keyboard. Malcolm Cecil always had stories about incidents that took place when he was recording Stevie. Like a game they used to play in the hallways at the record plant in L.A. The hallway was about 10 feet wide, and Stevie would stand in the middle of the floor with about 4 feet of space on either side. The object of the game was to get by Stevie on one side or the other without him catching you. According to Malcolm, it couldn't be done. I would have suspected that Malcolm, practitioner of Tai Chi, would certainly have perfected a silent step among the pirouettes and paces I'd seen him go through. But no matter. Evidently, Stevie was a master of a superior art. Ears like an eagle. When you spent time with Stevie, the extraordinary became commonplace. The unusual was unremarkable, and the previously overwhelming could be overlooked. The things that made him seem extraordinary to me were not confined to the stage. In fact, they had nothing to do with this stage presence. But I'd also been going out more and more to catch earlier parts of his show well before he called out for me to join him. I liked the opening. I liked the strength of it, the sudden flashes of light and color and movement. I'm sure I got as big a kick as anyone else when he was captured by the spotlight, rocking like a pendulum with dreads from side to side and cranking Wonderlove into Sir Duke. I was also pulled from the reverie of my dressing room to catch the transition that took place in the middle of the set when the band members seemed to evaporate like mist and Stevie was left alone at the keyboards. There was something unbelievably poignant about the isolation. The darkness of the giant arena was filled with silent memories and lately became a magic carpet he rolled out for us to ride. I still wanted to believe I was a better lyricist, but there was mounting evidence to the contrary on an album of surgical sensitivity called Hotter Than July. I left my dressing room during the solo selection of Stevie's set to listen to lyrics that were more than something to say while playing piano. If you happen to notice a man leaning at an awkward angle in the shadows of the tunnel connecting us to privacy, it was only me eavesdropping on the chill and lonely certainty of lately. 38. Different dates on the tour were memorable for different reasons. Some days I took notes, though most of those notes seemed to have been done as a joke, some kind of acrobatic way of pulling my own leg. There were either a few lines written before the show along with whatever expenses I needed to note, or after the concert in the early AM, there was a separate page or two that described something that happened or that I felt during the day or evening. There was rarely both, rarely an occasion when I wrote something before and after a show. December 8, 1980 in Oakland was a before and after day. I still remember the after feelings now. I rarely missed things Stevie said to me, but when I saw him at the bottom of the backstage stairs at the arena in Oakland, I thought I must have misheard him. Maybe it was the shock at what he had said. Maybe I hadn't missed what he said and just thought I did. It was something I didn't want to hear. But no, I must have mistaken Stevie for sure. "What did you say?" I asked him, trying to get above the noise. "I said some psycho, some crazy person shot John Lennon," said Stevie, "and I'm wondering how to handle it." I am not so silly or naive as to suspect that there is an ultimate evil, but the death of a good man, so rare as to be nearly extinct, is a thorough tragedy. And what do you say about it to 17,000 people who have come out to see you and enjoy themselves? I got that same feeling I'd felt when I heard that Dr. King or someone else was killed. That sense of a certain part of you being drained away, a loss of self. There were certain events in your life that had such historical significance that you were supposed to remember the circumstances under which you received the news for the rest of your life. That was probably what some section of humanity used to illustrate man's superiority over other animals. Memories of miseries that memorialize. Having those memories was like turning down the corner of a page in your life's book. But maybe animals turn down corners of pages too. They might not choose the date of the death of John Lennon, non to see as a date of loss and mourning. They might not choose the date of the death of John Lennon to see as a date of loss and mourning. They would be more likely to remember the date the Ringling Brothers died or the day the woman from Born Free was born. I was sure they talked about important things. I didn't have the dialogue down pat, but I could picture a conversation between two lions on a late-night walk across the savannah. "Yeah, that's where it was, man," one of them says. "Right over there by the watering hole. A big, mean-looking thing with sharp teeth and the strongest grip you ever heard of. The gorilla called it an animal trap. Man, that thing grabbed Freddie Leopard and held him for hours. The gorilla got Freddie loose, but his legs was all fucked up and he's still walking with a limp." Just exactly what did those recollections, those dog-eared pages, prove? That you were connected to the human race? It couldn't be, because if so, people born since then who weren't around then couldn't be connected. That's why there were history books and parents and other folks to tell you what happened before you got here. And why did you need to remember those things? Most of them were about someone being killed or assassinated. You could almost feel as though you needed an alibi. Where were you the day that such and such a person was murdered? They were pages in history books, however. I didn't know why. I didn't know what it proved. That you were connected to the human race? They were usually the least human things you could imagine. Unnatural disasters. I always knew where I'd been. I was in last period history class at DeWitt Clinton High School when the principal announced from the bottom of an empty barrel, "Ladies and gentlemen, I regret to inform you that your president is dead." He was talking about John Kennedy, shot to death by someone in Dallas. I was in the little theater at Lincoln when a guy everyone called the Beast had thrown open a rear door and shouted, "The Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King has been shot and killed in Memphis, Tennessee." I was in my bedroom on West 17th Street when man first reached the moon, and I had written a poem called Whitey on the Moon that very night, for which my mother had come up with the punchline, "We're gonna send these doctor bills air mail special to Whitey on the Moon." I was drawn back to a conversation with my grandmother as she reenacted the national shock that shook America when the news came down that Franklin Delano Roosevelt was dead. "It was just incredible," she said with her eyes getting wet. "Nobody seemed to think that he ever really died." And now I would always remember the night John Lennon died. Yep, because of who told me and where, but also because of the effect the news had on the crowd. It proved we had been right, Stevie and I, when we hastily decided that it would serve no purpose to make that announcement before he played. "No, just wait until the end, before we play them songs," I told him. "Hell, ain't nothing they can do about it." And that had been soon enough. The effect of Stevie's somber announcement on the crowd was like a punch in the diaphragm, causing them to let out a spontaneous, "What?" Then there was a second of silence, a missing sound, as if someone had covered their mouths with plastic so tight not even their breathing could be detected. I was standing at the back of the stage outside of the cylinder of light that surrounded Stevie, next to Carlos Santana and Rodney Franklin, who were joining us for the closing tunes. Stevie had more to say than just the mere announcement that John Lennon had been shot and killed. For the next 5 minutes, he spoke spontaneously about his friendship with John Lennon, how they'd met, when and where, what they had enjoyed together, and what kind of man he felt Lennon was. That last one was the key because it drew a line between what had happened in New York that day and what had happened on that motel balcony in Memphis, Tennessee a dozen years before. And it drew a circle around the kind of men who stood up for both peace and change. That circle looked suspiciously like a fucking bullseye to me. It underlined the risks that such men took because of what all too often happened to them. Stevie said it made the rally 5 weeks in the future just that much more significant. All I was thinking about was that it made security more significant. That was for damn sure. But it was another stunning moment in an evening of already notable cold water slaps, a raw reminder of how the world occasionally reached inside the cocoon that tours and studios and offices on West 57th Street provide. It stopped your heart for a beat and froze your lungs for a gasp, showing you how fragile your grip on life was and how many enemies you didn't know you had. It also gave Stevie Wonder's tour and his quest for a national holiday for a man of peace more substance, more fundamental legitimacy. Not just to me. Everyone seemed to understand a little better where Stevie was coming from and what this campaign was all about. It went from somewhere back down memory lane to, hey, motherfuckers out there are still folks who are insane. In 1968, this crowd was 8 to 12 years old, and they weren't Beatlemaniacs, but they did know rock and roll. The politics of right and wrong make everything complicated to a generation who's never had a leader assassinated. But suddenly it felt like 68, and as far back as it seems, one man says, imagine, and the other says, I have a dream. Stevie took his heart with him on stage some nights, both parts of his heart, the warm part and the part that sat in fear. It showed his feelings. In the whole arena that night in Oakland, there could not have been a legitimate doubt about his sincerity. His respect for Dr. King and his friendship for John Lennon took shape and gained dimension as he left the campaign trail and gave 17,000 that could have been 17 million or just 17 a look at what most men will deny they have. An inside where all the insanity and madness of this world really hurt and enraged you. I had felt a little of that from Stevie before. It was simmering there on 2020 when he was creating a song for Barbara Walters. It was in his voice in Boston, Massachusetts, when he stopped a show to review that city's record of racism. It was a grasp of an essence of things about life that far exceeded whether Stevie could hold a note or play a scale or write his name, much less a tune. This was a man whose humanity and compassion was real, as visible and as certain as the tears that seeped from beneath his dark glasses and flowed freely down his face onto his clothes. Tears he never bothered to wipe away. Stevie's talking was like a jazz solo, spontaneous and immediate, an expression so honest as to be almost embarrassing. I was trying to find things to look for around my shoes as tears took a front row seat in my eyes. Later, I could not remember us playing those last two songs, though I was sure we had. I could only bring back 3 solid images of that night. 2 of Stevie. The first one was of the brother standing there waiting for me at the bottom of those stairs. The second was of him standing alone in the spotlight, crying. And the third was of me standing there next to Santana with our eyes sweeping the floor as though there was really something to look for. I carried one other memory out of Oakland with me. It was about an article in the paper the next morning, a review of the show that slammed both me and Stevie to the floor, starting with the first paragraph. How dare I be called the Minister of Information, it said, and how dare Stevie be called the Ambassador of Love to the world, when neither of us had the decency to mention that a friend or a fraternal brother had been killed. The implication of this was racist in its nature. It implied that because I was black and Stevie was black and John Lennon was white and therefore not a soul brother, that there had been no mention from the stage about the murder. Kegleg was outraged. What the hell he talking about, boss? Stevie standing up there all that time talking? It's about the deadline, Keg, I tried to explain. In order to get that article into the paper this morning, the reporter had to leave by 11, and Stevie didn't start talking until 11:30. What that meant was that 17,000 people knew what had happened, but 300,000 read in the paper the next morning that both Stevie and I were far less than we ever intended to be. 39. January 15, 1981. What's amazing about people who are supposed to think of everything is how many things have never crossed their minds. It's obvious that what that expression is meant to indicate focuses on a specific subject, like whatever is going on in your life or what you're involved with at the time. But the middle of January 1981, I should have known a whole lot more than I did about what I was involved in and what was going on in my life. That was never more clear to me than when I saw how things looked from the back of the outdoor stage set up on the Washington, D.C. Monument grounds as Stevie's rally for Dr. King got underway. I can't even explain to you how little I knew, but I will try to explain it to you the way it occurred to me. I would never claim to be the smartest son of a gun on the planet. If I had claimed that, all of you readers would know by now that I was lying. But by the same token, by then I had been in this business for 10 years and had to feel as though I knew more than when I started. And also, by then I had been working on the Hotter Than July tour for 10 weeks and had some new information crossing my mind as I climbed the back stairs onto the temporary stage and looked out at perhaps 50,000 people standing shoulder to shoulder across the expanse of the mall chanting, "Martin Luther King Day, we took a holiday." As of January 15, I could look back 10 weeks to Halloween since I'd been working on the Hotter Than July tour. It was a project that, when taken as a whole, was set up to cover 16 weeks or 4 months, a third of a year. The endeavor was to cut into 2 6-week halves with a rest period that lasted a month. Since the tour had gone on break from the West Coast in mid-December, my life had not been free of upset and disruption, but business-wise and music-wise, things were on schedule. My new album, called Real Eyes, had been released around the 1st of December. Some support for our performances over the next 2 months or so could be expected. That meant everyone would get paid, and some of the music I was writing and arranging for our virtually new configuration with the horn section was starting to fit. That was good. In essence, this rally was the halftime show before the second 6-week half. But if you've ever seen the Florida A&M marching band, just how long do you think it takes to perfect those steps, formations, baton tosses, improvisations, and instrument playing? So nobody that I could see up there seemed likely to jump up and start majoretting up and down Constitution Avenue, but I was pleased to see how many people thought Stevie was worth supporting. One thing that knocked me out looking at this halftime show was how much I had not thought about, like how much work was involved in organizing a fucking rally. That was what Stevie had done and what had to have taken up so much of his offstage time when we were playing, and what must have consumed what I was calling a rest period, the month off between December 15 and today, Dr. King's birthday. This had to have dominated a great deal of his time and probably much more of his thoughts. The rally. Ways to publicize it. Ways to dramatize it. Ways to legitimize it. Some of it was obvious. You had to have permits, like a license to have a parade. That seemed bizarre, but it took a necessary number of police to close certain streets or divert traffic or just stand around looking like police. And on the monument grounds, there were wooden sawhorses and security and crowd restraints and a stage and sound equipment and technicians to set it all up and run it. And I was enjoying another piece of equipment I felt was necessary: a heat-blowing machine to warm my chilly backside. I had no idea what this was costing, what the total expenses were, nor did I ever ask about it and have the expenses incurred by Stevie neurotically concealed from me. I didn't have any way to justify saying, "Hey, just what the hell is this going to cost?" I considered that this information was probably something that was being distributed on a need-to-know basis, and apparently I did not have that. I didn't worry about why. My respect for Stevie Wonder expanded in every direction that day. I was following his lead like a member of his band because seeing as he had envisioned was a new level of believing. It was something that seeped in softly, and when you were personally touched by someone's effort and genuine sincerity, your brain said you didn't yet understand, but your soul said you should trust. We had been to Mayor Marion Barry's office earlier in the day. There I was introduced to the winner of a citywide essay contest that had run in the D.C. school system. The theme of the essay was why Dr. King's birthday should be a national holiday, and the contest was open to middle and high school students. A 7th grader won, and I thought the fact that he was in the 7th grade was the headline out of that. After they introduced us, I took a few minutes to read his essay so I would know what to be listening for. My cue when he came to the end, because now, at the rally, I would present him to the crowd. It was a gray winter day, the type of gray that looked permanent, not bothered with clouds or memories of blue. Gray, sullen, not threatening, but sporting an attitude. Somebody was organizing things, checking out how many speakers were on hand who wanted to say a few words. When we got to the part of the program where the kid was to read his essay, I introduced him and walked back off stage. I kept one ear on the loudspeakers because I had to be on it when he was through. That would be no more than 5 minutes max. At some stage, I heard the kid having trouble reading his own essay. I thought he might have been nervous with the big crowd and the TV audience. It must have felt like everybody in the world was watching him. I could hear the crowd getting restless, and a couple of folks started giving the kid a hard time. Suddenly, mid-sentence, or maybe in the middle of a word, the kid stopped. He turned around and went back to his seat. It was a seat of honor right behind the podium in the middle of the stage. It was quiet now, just a sprinkle of sympathetic applause. I found my list of speakers and introduced the next one, but I realized something had gone wrong. As the next speaker approached the podium, I went over to the kid and said, "Let me see that essay there, brother man." And sure enough, he had stopped at the top of his second page, a good 5 or 6 paragraphs from the end. He had been reading from a mimeographed copy of his essay, and the ink was faded. I would have needed night goggles or some shit to see what was on that paper. I waited until that next speaker was through, then went up there and explained to the audience that I was going to introduce the kid again, and that he was going to read his essay to the end, and that they were going to listen. "Yeah, I knew it was cold," I said, "but it was cold for this kid too, and he was reading from a faded copy, and I didn't want to hear nothing from the crowd but applause. Period. Have some patience with this young brother, please." After I introduced him, I walked backstage again. He started to read again, and I heard him coming to the point where he had faltered the part on the page that was damn near invisible. He started to falter again, and I listened for some wise ass to say something, but then it started to go smoothly, and I looked over, and there was Diana Ross standing next to him with her arm around his shoulder. Without being in the way, without making it her essay, she helped him over those rough spots. My man's confidence got a lift, and the crowd started to appreciate what he had written. I stood there thinking, there must be 30 or 40 adults up here on this stage, and she's the only one of us who thought to go up there and help the brother. Jesse Jackson spoke too. His attitude was about changing the laws and about people needing to know more about Thurgood Marshall and needing to know more about what happened, because the way to change America was through the law. You see, if you don't change the law, you don't change anything. You could burn your community down and somebody else would build it up. All you were doing was burning down some houses. But if you changed the law, then you had done a whole lot to change the foundation of society. To be sure, I looked at the appearances there and then as a tribute for respect for Dr. King. But they were also an indication of respect for a brother for taking a step to bring a positive idea forward, to remind some of us that we could hardly criticize congressmen and other representatives for inaction if their attempts to push ideas important to us out in the open received no visible interest from those it purportedly would benefit most. Yeah, this piece of legislation to make Dr. King's birthday into a national holiday looked like a long shot, especially being raised just after America had elected Ronald Reagan, who would be inaugurated at the other end of the mall in 5 days. But if our community was to make valuable contributions, then those who made them had to be recognized as offering something of value. Why would the next one of us feel that he or she should make the effort, marshal the strength, and somehow fortify him or herself against the opposition that always seemed stronger, longer, with more bona fide other side, if even a man who won the Nobel Peace Prize was ignored where those efforts for peace had done the most good? Something was wrong with ignoring a man here that the world had acknowledged everywhere. To bring about a change inside the minds of people is difficult. That's why there are books and teachers and laws. A change in people's hearts is even more difficult to gauge. There has to be some sign from those who represent them in a society where folks live together without touching. There has to be some assurance that we have learned that those who show the world did not present offerings that only people outside our country needed. Certainly, recognition of a Desmond Tutu or a Martin Luther King by panels of objective individuals pointed out the value of those they honored beyond the constrictions of geography, that the work they did, in essence, came from this or that community, but was of value to all mankind. How could this country purport to lead mankind and ignore what mankind needed and respected? Any American raised in an atmosphere of abuse and violence who suggested that centuries of deliberate discrimination could be overcome without responding to the oppressors in kind was not just valuable, but invaluable. This was what Dr. King signified, and this was what Stevie Wonder was calling on America to honor. All holidays should not be set aside for generals. To have the country honor men for doing what they did at a time when difficult personal decisions made their actions worthwhile for the overall good meant the same thing for all citizens. That had been both the point and the ultimate disappointment of what had once been called the Civil Rights Movement. What was special about the 1960s was that there was only one thing happening, one movement, and that was the civil rights movement. There were different organizations coming from different angles because of geography, but in essence, everybody had the same objective. It came so suddenly from so many different angles, things happening in so many different towns and cities at once, that the powers that be were caught off guard. The powers had taken control when Eisenhower was elected. He held office while they secured a grip around our throats. He even spoke about it before he left office. But there was a fuck-up, an oversight. They overlooked the same folks that they always overlooked. See, this was not long after Ralph Ellison had summed us up in Invisible Man. We were the last item on the last page of the last program. But that didn't last, because the last thing they had counted on was active dissent. Until the 1960s, the movement had been the exclusive property of middle-aged and old people. Then it became a young people thing, and as the 1960s opened up, the key word became activism, with Stokely Carmichael and the SNCC freedom rides and sit-ins. There was a new feeling of power in black communities, and once it got started, it was on the powers like paint. But at some point, a difference was created between equality, freedom, and civil rights. Those differences were played up because something had to be done about the sudden unity among black folks all over the country. Folks got more media attention whenever they accentuated the differences. There were media-created splinters. Otherwise, the civil rights movement would have been enough and would have been more successful. Accomplishing the aims of the movement would have made gay rights and women's rights and lefts and rights extraneous. But the divide and conquer was the aim of programs like COINTELPRO, and even though it ended up working damn near backward, it worked. They separated the fingers on the hand and gave each group a different demand. We lost our way. Separated, none of us seemed to know to watch out for COINTELPRO. J. Edgar Hoover was dead, but in D.C., they honored what he had said. Fuck every one of them. There I was at the halftime show, looking up and down the field. I could see for the first time. I could see what this brother had seen long before, what really needed to be done. We all took the stage. The crowd continued to chant, "Martin Luther King Day." We took a holiday. Stevie stepped up to the mic and addressed them. "It's fitting," he said, "that we should gather here, for it was here that Martin Luther King inspired the entire nation and the world with his stirring words, his great vision both challenging and inspiring us with his great dream." People asked, "Why Stevie Wonder? As an artist, why should I be involved in this great cause?" I'm Stevie Wonder, the artist, yes, but I'm Steveland Morris, a man, a citizen of this country, and a human being. As an artist, my purpose is to communicate the message that can better improve the lives of all of us. I'd like to ask all of you, just for one moment, if you will, to be silent and to just think and hear in your mind the voice of our Dr. Martin Luther King. 40. In the summer of 1985, my daughter Gia, who was 5 at the time, was visiting my mother for a few weeks in New York City. As can happen with diabetics, Grandma ran too hard one day, ran down, and then ran out. It was up to her granddaughter to run over to the phone, hit the 911 buttons, and tell the operator where to go, like where she was calling from. That was the part that most impressed me and everyone else upon hearing about the save Gia made, that a 5-year-old just visiting New York, knew what street she was on, East 106th, and what apartment number they were in, 19A. Not only did that take a good memory, it took a good set of nerves not to panic at 5 or 55. Since they had the right angle on what and where, the EMTs were able to beam in with the glucose and said it was too close to black out and urged Mama to sack out for the rest of the evening before the next session of 911 roulette. The incident proved how smart the daughter Brenda and I produced was. She was intelligent and turning out to be a nice person. The parents could not dictate or direct the intellect. They couldn't make a lick of difference in terms of whether their offspring had one of their IQ scores or the others, one minus the others, or both of their IQ scores added together. But they did have a lot to do with what kind of person or how kind a person their child became. Sociology and every other inexact approximate science of odds and oddly negative prognostication be damned. Those sciences of vague, uneven basis and potential seemed to have been discovered to generalize and generally discourage humankind from being the kind of humans they could really be. That reminded me of that old Brooke Benton tune about the odds against going to heaven 6-1. Well, you had to figure that was absolute bullshit. I knew that odds maker Danny Sheridan covered a bunch of subjects out there in Vegas and that the British had odds on damn near everything, but I still doubted if numbers had or would ever be posted on heaven or hell, aside from the sure bet that you'd eventually have to get the hell out of here. A few years later, I called my mother from London on her birthday, June 6. We had a few laughs before she reminded me that it was a real long-distance call. We agreed we'd pick it up again when I got back to the USA. I told her I'd try to call her from Newark Airport in New Jersey, where I was heading next before getting a late shuttle from there back to Washington. Providing it took the usual amount of time to locate my bags, roll them through customs, and find my next boarding area, I'd have a tiny window to make a quick call if everything worked. It didn't. My big Continental jet from Heathrow landed an hour and a half late because of a storm. The last flight to D.C. was in 30 minutes and was overbooked by too many seats for me to dream of catching, even if I stood on the wing. What to do? I decided to go to Newark's Union Station and try to catch the last southbound Amtrak train of the night. While waiting for a cab, I called my mother. I couldn't reach her because the line was busy. I shrugged it off and got a taxi ride from a hassled and harassed brother complaining about the weather. I missed the last train south by 10 minutes, arriving at Newark Station shortly before 10 o'clock. The next train wasn't until 3 in the morning. A red-eye that arrived in Washington at 6 or 7 in the morning, I could wait for that, the ticket agent informed me. I looked unhappily around the dismal accommodations provided by Amtrak for Newark train riders. Obviously, this station was for catching trains, not waiting for them. There wasn't even a newsstand or a soft drink machine. Nothing to make you feel like you'd be waiting for anything but a robbery. I made another call to my mother to cry on her shoulder, but the line was busy. There was a 9:55 to New York's Penn Station. I went back to the ticket agent who was closing up for the evening, putting away his money and tickets. "I'm going north," I said. Suddenly, I could almost locate my lopsided grin. I brightened considerably. Hell, in New York, I could eat and get a magazine. There were people and signs of life. It would beat the hell out of waiting for God only knew what in the gloom of Newark's near morgue. I heard the whistle of the arriving train and had just enough time to grab my bags and struggle down a flight of stairs before it shushed to a stop. Two phrases came to mind right away when I arrived in New York City. It never failed. The first one was from Stevie's song, Just Enough for the City, when during the opening you hear his brother Calvin saying almost reverently, "New York, just like I pictured it." That was the perfect phrase with perfectly paced awe at the wonder of it all. The second phrase was, "New York, New York, so nice they named it twice." This was doubtless a contribution from a self-employed New York poet whose artistry was unrewarded by the city JCs, whose perspective ran more to Frank Sinatra than to a frank description, which also meant there might not have been many kudos available for the person who coined the term the Big Apple, which was rotting to the core just then. There was another saying that fit New York like a pimp fit in Times Square, 24/7. That was street folks' description of something open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. New York was that, and several institutions of legitimacy were counted on for day and night service 365 days a year. No downtimes, just shift changes. Penn Station was one of them. With trains bound for somewhere, everywhere, anywhere, and nowhere, there was an ongoing chaos that could remind you of the world's steady spin regardless of terrestrial complications, or involve you in how the madness of thousands of destinations could be coordinated in the brain of a human being. At that moment, I was being impressed by the system of coordination that got the cheeseburger I was eating from wherever the hell it had been just in time to save me from starvation. I took a minute before I decided on dessert and called my mother again. It was a little late, but hell, she was the one doing the yakking on the line. It was busy again. So at slightly past 11, I ordered a milkshake to help me contemplate. I didn't like what my contemplating was indicating. Maybe you had to know my mother, or know the Scotts in general, as she was a good representative of them. They were not loud, talkative, gregarious, flamboyant folks. They were not great users of telephones. The 3 hours I'd been unable to get past a busy signal would have been 3 months worth of her talking. There might have been a talk once in a while with Mrs. Cox, her good buddy from Jackson. And there were 1 or 2 other ladies and a male friend who called, but I could hardly remember a phone conversation of hers that lasted more than 15 minutes. And a conversation this late? I wouldn't call her after 10 o'clock without a life or death situation. At midnight, I tried again. Busy. I just knew the line wasn't engaged, and there was no reported trouble on the line. When the line had been busy at 8:30 and 9, it was unusual enough, but now it was into the realm of unbelievable. My name would not be the first name to come to mind if the question was bravery, but I was not one to panic, and I wasn't going to panic now. Still, I made up my mind quickly. I thanked the phone operator, found a locker for my luggage, and hailed a cab in front of Penn Station. I headed for 106th Street. Soon I was banging. No, make that banging. beating with both fists on the door of apartment 19A in the presence of a startled woman from the Housing Authority police who was determined not to show she was startled. Beating in flurries of 5 that rang out like cannon shots without room to echo in the closet-sized hallway, until even the barricaded, blasé, mind-your-own-business New Yorkers were disrupted, until the lady in her neatly pressed uniform touched my arm lightly to say, "Who is it?" came a squeak of a shaking voice from behind the door. And then again, "Who is it?" I was shouting, "It's your son. Open the door." "My son doesn't live here anymore," I heard. Then the door opened as far as the chain restraint would allow, revealing my mother, or at least as much as I needed to see. There was a gash across her cheek with dried blood and drying blood like a halo around it as it turned shades of blue. Recognizing me, she let us in, her son, and the lady in uniform who was now speaking into her radio. I helped my mother back to the kitchen and safety while we waited for the ambulance.
Context of White Supremacy. Gus T Renegade. In for another broadcast. That was our first segment on Gil Scott-Heron's The Last Holiday, a memoir. We have one more segment and we will be all done. Again, I think next week we should be moving to Frantz Fanon's Wretched of the Earth, but that is for another week. This week, Gil Scott-Heron. If you have comments you would like to share, concluding thoughts on the text, thoughts specifically on the portions, first few chapters that we covered this week, the number to dial 641-715-3640. The code 564-943#. Press star 6 if you would like to participate. Number again, 641-715-3640. The code 564-943#. Press star 6 if you would like to participate. With that, if you do not want to use your phone to dial in, if you want to use the free VOP line, it's linked at Black Talk Radio Network. If you need the address, tiny.cc/1race, and that is the number 1. Address again, tiny.cc/1race, and that is the number 1. When you put in that address, look on the left of the page. You'll see a link. It says free VOP line. Click that link. When you do so, it will open a small window on your screen. The top line, it's a drop-down menu, same number that I just gave out, 641-715-3640. The next line, it will ask for the code. It is the same, 564-943. You get to the last line, it will ask for a name. You can enter a real name, nickname. You can press random keys, whatever you're comfortable with. Once you get all that information entered, you can click the green button. It'll connect you to the broadcast. You should be able to hear us. Same procedure if you want to participate. You'll see the dial pad on your screen. Press star 6. You'll hear the prompt to press the number 1. Do so. We'll see your hand and get you on the line. Again, if folks have any final thoughts they would like to get in, Gil Scott-Heron, we only got one more session. I am a big Gil Scott-Heron fan, have been for a number of years, even before the cows began. I think some of our listeners are as well, so hopefully it's been informative, and I guess especially so for people who were not familiar with him before we read the book. Any thoughts from our listeners? Folks who have a hand up, line should be open.
Greetings, can I be heard?
Yes, sir. Greetings, Mr. Firefighter.
Yes. Gil Scott-Heron was popular when I became knowledgeable of him when I went to college. And it puts you in the mode of, instead of dancing and quote unquote having a good time, it puts you in the mode of thinking, for one thing. The words, the lyrics, and or the lyrics became more important than the beats or the rhythm in the background, and that's just what it was, background. And it puts you more in a more serious thinking mode. So that's always something that I would identify as constructive. And he was one of those ones that was good at that. I would say also Sam Cooke and Curtis Mayfield would be two other people that I think right off the top of my head as being that also. Although they had good beats and whatever, but what they was talking about in a lot of their music was something that would make the listener think and perhaps do constructive things. So he was very vital. I took a few notes. Number one, I have here, and this is based on the person known as Stevie Wonder. And that's what I always saw his real name, his not real name, but his, I guess, name outside of Motown was Stevie Morris. I read about that. But anyway, that when you lose a sense, or I didn't put down also if you lose a member of your body, a finger, a leg, or arm, it has a tendency sometimes with that individual that everything else about themselves gets stronger. And there's evidence with that with Stevie Morris and Ray Charles. That's obvious. That not obvious, but there's a lot of evidence, especially with those two people, and I'm assuming with a lot of other people who don't have, quote unquote household names, that takes place because if they are in a constructive environment and around constructive people. One thing I did read about Stevie Morris, that the people around him never allowed him to make the inability to not to see physically a handicap. And there was what was that song that he did when he was talking about his childhood in the song? It was a upbeat song. I just can't remember the name of it. When I was a nappy-headed boy, I just can't think of the name of the song. But basically the things he talked about in the song itself gives you the indication that he was just like everybody else. But anyway, moving on. I am going to stay on course with Gil Scott-Heron. Another part of the reading that gave me the thought to write it down was respecting the approval of your enemy can compromise your ability to make the correct choices. We have to learn to think without white people's assistance, but based on logical thought. White people have done a lot, not created, but arranged a lot of things. But one thing they didn't arrange was logical thought. And we all can do that. And I'm speaking about the whole idea of even contemplating about telling someone, informing someone about some white person's death, under the global system of racist white supremacy. Although I do listen to have listened to some of the person that they're talking about, some of his songs. He did have some honesty in some of his songs. I forgot his name, the Beatle. Not
John
Paul
Lennon?
McCartney, but John Lennon. Yeah, he did have some honesty in some of his songs, including the one that they mentioned, "Imagine," which he did when the Beatles broke up. But that doesn't mean I'm going to go around and have this type of salute and whatever to him. And it's just not going to be that way with me under the global system of racist white supremacy. I'm just not going to do it. And there's one more thing in here. I was very pleased about the idea of how that young person was assisted up on that stage. I vaguely remember I remember it was some sort of live I guess concert / speaking engagement that took place on this matter that I think he's talking about concerning Dr. King's birthday. This is right during the time when Ronald Wilson Reagan was about to be inaugurated. I recall that I was just on the fire department, I think, at the time, and I remember it was very cold. It was very cold in Washington D.C. because it was kind of like snowing or something like that. I think they described it. He described it in the reading. But I thought that was a very good thing for himself and Diana Ross to do what they did, with that young person, because from my experience of being around younger people for at least about 30 some odd years, you would have them for life. You would have them as far as respect for life when you do things like that. Even if it's just that one particular occasion, they would be very thankful to you when you do that. And it should be something that we make a practice of, not just with our own offspring, but all of them, especially non-white black younger people, when you show some sort of attention to them, that you get a lot back in return. I certainly have. In my interactions with them, that's the fuel why I keep being around them, is from that standpoint, and that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Appreciate that, retired firefighter. I think "I Wish" was the Stevie Wonder song you were thinking of.
That's it. Yeah, that's it right there.
Songs in the Key of Life. Yes. Mr. Demery, did you have a commentary you were going to share?
Yes, may I be heard?
Yes, sir.
Yes, I was about to say that the name of that song was "I Wish," that you updated, Firefight. I'll start off with Gil Scott-Heron. To me, seemed to be very informative and knowledgeable, and reading this book actually showed a human side to him for me, because I sort of had him in an iconic type position. Not really, I didn't know of any faults or any character flaws, but there's a few things that puzzle me, that I think, by the end of the book, it'll probably be answered. but we all know that he loved his mother. He was close to her. But one thing, I was wondering, most people, when they become famous or celebrities, usually one of the first things that they do is buy a home for their mother. But then she seemed to still be living in New York in an apartment. And I know how New Yorkers are. They don't really like to leave the city. So once you're a New Yorker, I guess you're a New Yorker for life. He probably could not persuade her to leave. But the book started in this particular section about Stevie Wonder's extraordinary hearing ability, how people could not really be in the room without him being aware of it. I think that part of it was a game that they were playing on Gil Scott-Heron, but there are cases like the firefighter was saying, when you lose something like your eyesight, then other senses become more sensitive. So his hearing, sense of taste and smell was probably exaggerated. I like the part where he said that he wanted to believe himself to be a better lyricist than Stevie Wonder. Man, you must have had quite a bit of ego going there. But I guess to each his own. And he found out, by the close proximity of Stevie, just how great Stevie Wonder was. And if you take under consideration that he was had been in the music business since he was a little child, he probably had about 20 years in the business before Gil Scott-Heron was ever recognized. But that part when they were doing the concert, and December the 8th, 1980, when John Lennon was murdered, the thing, I think they correctly didn't want to make that announcement before the show was over. It would have put a damper on the show. And not only that, Stevie knew the guy personally, so, he could pick the time that he wanted to tell his audience what had happened. And the fact that he, did a heartfelt speech, about that, how much he knew John Lennon and this and that, the writers or newspaper people or media would take that and turn it around like Stevie and Gil Scott-Heron did not have any sympathy for the artist because he was white. And then for Gil Scott to say that it was racist, he said that the article insinuated that they were racist, would, to me, kind of show some confusion as far as understanding what racism, white supremacy is all about. They'll write a bad article on you, even if he was there listening to what Stevie said, and then they'll take whatever Stevie said and turn that around. So the part about, I guess, turning a page, doing a dog ear on pages, and about remembering unnatural disasters, I think that's probably true. And then he talked about how his grandmother would talk about Franklin Delano Roosevelt. This guy, did 4 terms, I believe, as president. So, it would lead somebody to believe that, maybe uh, he was around quite a while, but the part about let's see here. That was the next chapter when he was talking about the differences, what was going on, I guess, during the civil rights movement, and how the different organizations coming from different angles because of geography. But in essence, everybody had the same objective. It came so suddenly from so many different angles. Things happened in so many different towns and cities that the powers that be were caught off guard. In the next paragraph, the powers had taken control when Eisenhower was elected. He held office while they secured a grip around our throats. I'm sure the system of white supremacy was already in place before Eisenhower got there, and I know that the grip around our throats were definitely there even before Eisenhower took over and even afterwards. And the mention of COINTELPRO, J. Edgar Hoover, there was a lot of opposition to Martin Luther King's birthday becoming a holiday, and I don't think that it was accurately depicted in the book. I think the book intentionally kind of pussyfooted around the what white people really did and how they opposed not only Martin Luther King's birthday becoming a holiday, but just his existence. And then even after he was dead, he was assassinated, then, they even showed some elation, or that they were happy that he was no longer with us. But on a lighter note, the Stevie Wonder's song, Just Enough for the City, I did not know that was his brother Calvin saying New York, just like I pictured it. I could just hear that song in my mind. And that part where he had said that. But I'll mute my line on that and give somebody else a chance. Thanks.
Indeed. If other folks are listening and they have comments, feel free to dial in as well. We can get your final thoughts, observations, summations from the text. Some of the things that I myself noted. Let's see where this is in chapter 3. Well, the hearing with Stevie Wonder, thought that was great. Agree. I think a lot of you all had a great assessment in terms of your other senses getting stronger, what have you. Phenomenal. Even reminded me of some of Dr. Welsing's commentary about higher concentrations of melanin allowing for greater levels of sensitivity to sounds, being able to hear things, vision, etc. Moving forward. In chapter 38, where he begins, he's talking about John Lennon's death, which he says, I'm not so silly or naive as to suspect there is an ultimate evil, but the death of a good man so rare as to be nearly extinct is a thorough tragedy. I almost felt like we were hearing about an albino squirrel or something right here. This reminds me a lot of the commentary. The book we read before this was Coretta Scott King's My Life, My Love, My Legacy. I think she had a lot of similar passages in the book. Now, John Lennon wasn't one of her dead white people mentioned, but she did mention John F. Kennedy, Robert F. Kennedy. I think there might have even been another white person that she mentions later on in the book. I think it was some of the white people who died, the two white boys who died with James Chaney in 1964 in Mississippi. Lots of times of spending a lot of emotion, a lot of words, a lot of pages, making sure that the reading audience understands, oh man, I was really, really hurt by these white people. And I don't say that to be callous, but I do say that because in the system of white supremacy, I think number one, hey, it could be as simple as editors say, we want to make sure that we maximize profits. And that means we want to get as many white readers as possible. They don't want to hear we got to make sure that you are showing some white identification. They don't want to hear you moaning and weeping about dead niggers. So we got to make sure that you include some white people that you're sad about. It could be that. But I also think that this system does condition us to empathize and relate to white people deeply. Like John F. Kennedy. That's why you have so many black people, particular black people who lived in that era, who had a deep, authentic emotional connection to John F. Kennedy or Robert Kennedy, just a variety of white people. And this is long running. This is a big part of how the system of white supremacy continues to operate, and why I think very important to just manage our emotions. But I mean, this takes up I almost feel like we got more information on John Lennon. We got way more information on John Lennon's death than the incident in Boston that we talked about last week, where they actually stopped the performance for Stevie Wonder to talk about the history of racism. We got way more information about John Lennon than that. I even think we got more information about John Lennon than MLK. I don't really remember a long sustained talk about MLK until I guess we get to the concert or rally, not a concert, rally coming up in DC. But I don't even remember all that when Martin Luther King was assassinated. That just kind of moved forward in the book. Just continue throughout this chapter. Let me see some of the other things that stood out in the chapter related to that. Where he says he goes through this list. He puts John Lennon on this list of where was I when these people died or when these events happened. All of them, with the exception of MLK's assassination, involve white people. This is where I was the day John Kennedy was assassinated. That was in Coretta Scott King's memoir. This is where I was when they landed on the moon. This is where I was, or my grandmother, explaining to me when President Roosevelt died. Just white people centered around what's happening when these white people died, that their life, even when they're not present, their life takes center stage. They are more important than anything that could possibly be happening with black people. I think Firefighter also touched on that in his commentary. Let's see. Next up. I thought it was, even though he mentioned it kind of as a ha-ha joke, but when he said Stevie Wonder was thinking that it made, when John Lennon was assassinated or killed, that made the rally more significant. And Gil Scott-Heron said he was thinking that, hey, it made security more significant to make sure that we are protected. And I think that is totally logical, given what they're doing, given that they are black. They are also entertainers. And Gil Scott-Heron, with his body of work, I would certainly hope that they had, pretty stellar security, and that they just had a road manager or someone affiliated with their staff who was just beaten up in Boston. I would hope they had, extraordinary security. Let's see, continuing. Really wish we had got more information about the Boston. I did, as I said I would. I went back to check the newspaper archives, and I did not find a write-up in the Boston paper I did find the write-up in the Boston paper about this incident, but they didn't say anything, at least the report that I saw, about his commentary about racism in Boston. They just mentioned his show and it was great and blah, blah, blah. And, they kept it moving in the report that I saw. If anyone can find other information where they give more detail about what he said, I would love it. I did see a different article that was talking about the history of Boston's racism, and they also talked about that concert, but they referenced Gil Scott-Heron's book, so it was nothing. There was no new information. I also looked for the Oakland concert to see if I could find the article where they blasted Stevie Wonder and Gil as being, racist because they didn't, take a moment to grieve publicly for John Lennon, which was a lie. They actually did. This is another one. I think Firefighter touched on this. Whites don't get the benefit of the doubt, particularly any time period, really. This is a part of COINTELPRO, this sort of thing, deliberately circulating false information in newspapers. Very well, the guy could have been there, or guy or gal who was covering this could have been there and just did not report the information correctly. That's happened a lot as well. Let's see. Next, we got a mention of Marion Barry, the late, I think he just passed in 2014, former mayor in D.C. I think that's why I think also it's important a lot of times to do biographies, because a lot of these people will know very little information. I did not know half of this information about Gil Scott-Heron, even though I, heard a lot of his music and what have you. I know a bit, but I did not know all of this detail. If someone had asked me, years ago, if I knew what connection he had to the King holiday, I would have said none. Let's see. But yeah, that's why I think it's important reading so you know more information about these people. Someone like Coretta Scott King or Gil Scott-Heron or Marion Barry or whomever the person happens to be. Even former governor of South Carolina, Bill Tillman, read his bio as well. Let's see. The concert, I thought that was great. I think you all touched on that as well. Great to see Diana Ross stepping forward to help out this young person. Sad, I think Gil pointed that out, kind of sad that people kind of sat around and did not help out this young 7th grader giving his speech. Just again, I think it seems like white people do not have a problem if non-white people say, hey, we want to get together and have a big rally. Like Gil Scott said, he was almost ashamed to ask about the expenses for all of this. It seems like whites don't have too much of a problem saying, hey, if you niggers want to get together in DC or any other city and have a big rally and, load up, pile everybody that you possibly can in a wagon or a bus or a plane if you got the nickels to get here, come on down and, we'll get the security and flyers and buses and all that. It seems like they have no problem with those sort of events at all. That right there makes me kind of suspicious in participating in those sort of festivities, because it takes so much time and energy to get all that done. And I rarely, if ever, see a constructive payoff for Black people after all of that energy is expended. Let's see. His whole commentary, words are very important. Very, very important. His whole commentary, where he's talking about the civil rights movement, and I'm not even sure that that's an accurate assessment, but, VGQ, where he says that the civil rights movement was one movement and that it was just different organizations because of geography, in essence, with the same objective. In fact, I would say I do not think that that is true. When you've got some people whose objective is a beautiful society where they get to hang out with white people, you got other people who are saying that they want total separation. I would say, no, I do not agree. Because I don't even think you could even say that the objective was just ending racism, replacing it with justice, because that was not being stated explicitly, and then the details to get there in terms of what that would look like. So I would say, no, I don't think that was the case. And then moving forward, when he says the powers had taken control when Eisenhower was elected, who is he talking about exactly? The power. From there, it's even vague. Are we talking about people? Are these aliens? Is this some other strange force? He says he held office while they secured a grip around our throats. Again, who are we talking about when he says our throats? Is this everybody? Is this just Black people? Is this poor white people and Black people? Who are we talking about? He did mention Invisible Man. Great. Certainly focused on Black people. Ralph Ellison's book. Continuing, I did think it was great, even though he was very vague with his description in terms of who is in power. I did think it was very important right over the next paragraph where he talks about how during the civil rights movement that everybody was kind of pushing in the same direction in his assessment, but that one of the things COINTELPRO was really good at was creating differences. He says those differences were played up because something had to be done about the sudden unity among Black folks all over the country. Folks got more media attention whenever they accentuated differences. They were media created splinters. That is what racism, white supremacy does. Really, in my opinion, why it's so critically important not name calling other black people and really making that a primary effort to commit to minimizing conflict with other black people. I think that's something that would really, really greatly aid our effort to solve this problem immediately. And just to repeat, I repeated from Coretta Scott King's memoir, where she said that we were naive, talking about she and her husband, Dr. King, that they did not understand racism. They didn't understand COINTELPRO and what whites were doing to them. The same sort of admission from Gil Scott-Heron, where he says, but divide and conquer was the aim of programs like COINTELPRO, and even though it ended up working damn near backward, it worked. They separated the fingers on the hand and gave each group a different demand. We lost our way, separated. None of us seemed to know to watch out for COINTELPRO. That right there, not knowing to watch out for this, that tells me right there. Every time that you hear people saying that black people are more informed about racism, wrong. That's the point of reading Gil Scott-Heron. That's the point of reading Coretta Scott King. It's, to me, it's flagrant. You shouldn't need to read that, but right there, these sort of admissions go a long way to just, you got the confession. We just didn't understand what we were up against. That would have to mean the people that are doing the COINTELPRO planning, they are much smarter about the business of white supremacy than you are. Just following logic. Last comment I'll get in. In fact, I can save that one for next time around. Did any of the other folks with us have any comments they wanted to get in? If we missed anybody, or Mr. Demery for retired firefighter, any additional comments they wanted to get in? Anybody's thoughts about John Lennon? Because I do think this is really, really similar, particularly any of the folks who participated with Coretta Scott King, My Life, My Love, My Legacy. It's the same pattern of this. We got to pause our story amidst tremendous black suffering. That's what we had in both of these books, really. Amidst enormous black suffering, we have to pause and recognize good white people. Same pattern, folks remember from Coretta Scott King's book to what we heard about John Lennon this week. Any folks have commentary on that?
Can I be heard?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I'm on the road right now, so I'm using Bluetooth. But just wanted to mention about I don't want to say a story on John Lennon, but I read somewhere it may have been in a book about Muhammad Ali. Yeah, when the Beatles came down to Miami back in I think it was like '64, part of their being chauffeured around all over the place was somehow they ended up going to Fifth Street Gym, which is where Muhammad Ali at the time was Cassius Clay was training, and they actually John Lennon actually stated that he didn't think that Cassius Clay would win the title. They didn't want to take the picture, the iconic picture with him. They didn't want to take that picture with him, and so I mean he tried. He kind of like has this aura of some sort of being similar to Tim Wise in a sense, without really articulating racism, white supremacy, but nevertheless, he kind of takes on that kind of persona. But from my understanding of him, he was very good at hiding his behavior as a typical white person that can practice racism on a daily basis. When it comes down to it, but at the same time, he makes it obvious that white people do have understanding on what's correct when you listen to some of the songs in his lyrics. Some of the lyrics in his songs, some of the lyrics in his songs, that he does have an understanding of what is the correct thing. But just like all other white people, they choose to do the incorrect thing, the things that are what end up mistreating people. based on color. And that's just a thought of mine with the subject of John Lennon.
Dig it. Any other comments on that, comparing how the dead white people are presented in some of these biographies that we've read recently, and or if anyone had any comments on what we think happened, what was the medical problem that Gil's mother was experiencing that we ended on, chapter 40, right at the conclusion of the audio segment. Any thoughts on that from our callers?
Yes. I'd like to comment on John Lennon. See, these guys, the Beatles, they were British guys, came over from England. You know, they started somewhat of a phenomena, you know, with the majority of the whites here in the United States. I mean, we had our group, our music, Motown and soul. I mean, we probably did listen to the Beatles a lot. I didn't understand a lot of their songs. I didn't get a lot out of it. I mean, I wasn't that crazy about the Beatles, but I understand John Lennon and Paul McCartney wrote a lot of those lyrics, and that maybe their lyrics were talking about togetherness or peace, or I could, you know, look to see about, or and then it didn't work, because during that same time in the 80s, there was and we already know now, majority of those police shootings and killings were probably non-white people, mostly black. Then there was the crack epidemic that was going around in the 80s. You know, all these things were, you know, on the black community, devastating, you know, our community lives and communities. And we had a lot more to worry about than the Yellow Submarine during that time. So I don't think a lot of black people had, you know, I mean, they may have been hurt or felt sad, but I don't think it was on the same level as a Dr. Martin Luther King, or, you know, some person that had given his life for the cause, for the improvement of the lives of individuals. And I did want to say something about his mother, too, because she was born in 1927. And I think it was 1985 when he was calling her up. You know, that would make her less than 60 years old. She had diabetes, and which, you know, it's pretty common among black people, 50, 60 years older. You know, but she didn't seem to be doing that great managing, you know, it, because, you know, the fainting, passing out, you know, with a granddaughter present, and falling off the head. You know, as far as I'm concerned, if I had been a certain attack, that probably would have been the point where my mother would have to be under close super, carry on and travel, and then have to worry about his mother too. I'll mute my line.
Great insight, Mr. Demery Four. I think he has talked extensively about her diabetic condition and how she was or I guess not taking maybe the best care of her, and he included that as well this week when his granddaughter when his daughter, Gil's daughter, at a very young age had to call 911 to take care of grandmother. So absolutely, she's having a lot of health problems as a result of her diabetic condition. Any other comments folks wanted to get in before we get to the second audio segment? Any other commentary?
Yes, I just wanted to add some addition on, because I don't think I really accurately as I could have answered that your question. Based on our syndrome of our Stockholm syndrome, we get very melancholy with certain white people that we're supposed to feel sorry for or have empathy for. And I think white people in their propaganda really once again, it's just like the handshake and that sort of thing, to keep getting basically a report on us that we haven't been fed up about racist white supremacy. They mold these figures, the Franklin Roosevelts, the John Kennedys, the John Lennons, to whatever master likes, we're supposed to like it too. Whatever he or she doesn't like, we're supposed to not like it also. And they kind of like propagandize the backgrounds of these people, or these certain white people, and based on our reaction to it, unfortunately, it's kind of like favorable for the most part. They get a barometer on. Well, I ain't got to worry about those niggers. They have shown the proper concern that I expect them that they should have on it. So I can sleep well tonight, knowing that I got them where I got them, still have them psychologically where I need them to be at. That's basically what I had written down and notated and expressed it when I first mentioned about that with the John Lennon situation. Is that when your enemy is affecting you that deeply, it really compromises your ability as an individual to be able to think constructively and think along the lines of dismantling and or neutralizing what they have been doing to you. But what I'm grateful for is that they did not invent logical thinking. They did not invent logical thinking. I use myself as a prime example of how, with some concentration and some individualized thinking, you can basically think up some pretty constructive things. Work on changing or evolving your understanding better. And it's just something that one has to start developing within themselves and get rid of that Stockholm syndrome. That we all are affected by at some level. Hopefully, I made some sense better. Thank you.
Indeed. Appreciate it. Taking second opportunity to answer the question. Right on. Do we have anybody else comment they wanted to make sure they get in before we get to audio segment number 2? Whoa.
Press the wrong thing. Sorry.
We will live. Thank you. Anybody else comment they wanted to make sure they get in before we get to audio segment number 2? Final portion of Gil Scott-Heron's The Last Holiday. Folks satisfied? Grand. We will have ample time for folks to get their final comments in. You can drop an email as well. I'll check my email again before we conclude. So we are picking up chapter 41, Gil Scott-Heron, The Last Holiday, a memoir, Context of White Supremacy. Last segment.
41. In late February 1989, I was playing a weekend at Blues Alley in D.C. and noticed Lerma, the mother of my son Rumal, in the audience. It had been a long time since I'd seen her, though. I had never stopped wondering why she had forbidden me to say anything about Rumal and therefore forbidden me from saying anything to him. I wondered who he thought his father was. Maybe the man rumor had connected to Lerma from time to time. I remained mystified until that night. I went over and sat down, spoke to her, even took a picture with her. She told me she needed to talk with me, so I invited her to my hotel after the show. I literally had no idea what we would talk about, but I knew it must have something to do with the boy. That was obvious. Starting very slowly, she said, "I think it's time you had a talk with your son. He's beginning to ask me questions I can't answer." "Birds and bees questions?" I asked with a crooked smile. "And does that mean it's all right for me to tell people that he's my son?" I wish I could describe all of the expressions I saw flash, focus, and fade from her face. About 3 seconds stretched out between us as we looked into each other's eyes. Both of us were looking for things we were surprised not to find. I was looking for the honesty I could always count on from her, the quick reply or retort that she would lay in front of your shallowness or bounce off your arrogance. She was looking first for an indication of snide, then fake, a pretense of misdirection, then an attempted stab at some joke in poor taste, and finally her judgment collapsed on shock and recognition. "You've never mentioned him? I mean, Rumal," she started, stopped, started. It was my turn to be assertive. "Never," I said, "to anyone. You told me not to tell anyone he was my son, and I haven't. Not even my mother." "Your mother?" she repeated. "You didn't point out any exceptions," I told her, looking away. "So I couldn't make any. I haven't told my brother or sister or hell, anyone. Does this visit mean I can tell them?" As we talked further, she took me back as far as her visit to my house. She was trying to buy a house for her and Rumal in Alexandria. She felt as though she needed to have a fiancé with her when she showed up to see the house, that it was better to take a colleague from the Washington Post with her who could help represent stability and didn't want word circulating through the negotiations that her child was actually the son of a married man on Martha's Road. She got the house. It was a 3-story brick row house on Pine Lane Court, and as soon as the deal was complete and the papers signed, the brief charade with her coworker was abandoned. But no one had ever told me anything. It had been obvious that some of Lerma's buddies at the Post and the Washington Star had not been sworn to secrecy, unless they could only fuck with me about what they knew. And if they reported back to Lerma about my vague, evasive, and vacuous responses when they asked about my son, what had she thought? And what had she expected me to say? Yes, quite right. I'm a thorough shithead. Of course I know about the boy. Lerma brought him over to my house. Matter of fact, when she calls, I hang up. When she writes, I throw the letters away. So now that she's resorted to messing with me by messenger, I'm mortified. None of the above. She was standing in the middle of my hotel room while I sat down opposite her. She was talking to herself more than to me. about people knowing things. Yeah, I agreed, telling her the names of some of the people who had asked me questions over the years. But they all came up sliding and hiding like they were back in junior high, like, "Psst, hey Gil." And you said, "Nothing real," or nothing at all. I gave them all the information I could. None. I ran out of words around then, because I had run out and run down, and sort of felt run over. I knew what I was being told within all she was not saying, but there was nothing I could do. Lerma came out of it first and sat down. I asked if she wanted something to drink, some juice or something. How is he doing? Hell, how are you doing? I tried to laugh. I'm fine, she said. He's doing well. She was a little brighter as we moved on to her favorite subject, our son. A month later, I had been in a cab on my way to JFK Airport to catch a plane to Brussels when I suddenly directed the driver to go to LaGuardia Airport instead, to the terminal where the shuttle to D.C. flew. An hour and a half later, I was knocking on the door on Pine Lake Court, and then Lerma was at the door with a little smile. It was good to see her. I was at the right place. I became very fond of Rumal Rackley, and I've been amazed at the similarities in our lives despite the distance we started with between us. He has the disadvantage of looking a great deal like me, with the same wide smile that he flashes on occasion and the same offbeat sense of humor. He was also a fairly good student, and our lives ran parallel all the way to graduate school. We both had beautiful mothers from southern states who were college graduates. We both went to private high schools, in his case, Sidewell Friends in Washington. We both went to black colleges. He graduated from Hampton University, and he went on to grad school at Tuskegee's Medical School. My third child, a girl named Che, was born in England. She is a real trip, thoroughly full of near atomic energy and allegedly possessing an IQ that equals her mother and father's combined. She's a curious, furious hurricane of movement with more questions than jeopardy. Her specialty is hotel rooms. She finds them fascinating with altogether too many things to explore. How I became a father again at nearly 50 years old is a story I will save for another time. 42. On a typically warm Los Angeles evening in 1990, we were scheduled for 2 shows at Club Lingerie on Sunset Boulevard. The producers, the folks who ran the club, had to return some money when the second show was canceled. I take 100% of the blame for the fans' disappointment that night. As I was leaving the stage between the 2 shows, I suffered a stroke. I wish I had been more aware of my responsibilities as an observing artist. It would have been quite a coup for me to be able to describe to you exactly what happened to my body as I stepped with my usual stork-like grace. But I can't for the life of me remember the process, the actual changes that my body went through. I suppose it would read like those 2-page centerfold stories in the National Enquirer. I died and came back to life by Jesus Christ or something. The best I can do for you is a before and after. The before was the first show. Me on the stage with my band, working hard, enjoying myself and the crowd. Immediately before, I was standing in the center of the stage introducing and pointing to the members of the band over the closing coda of The Bottle. Everybody was smiling, huge to the point of laughter, lights coming up, crowd screaming, me raising both of my arms to embrace the applause. And then, hot, real hot, but not sweating. Something happened, the stroke, on the way down, those few steps at the front of the stage before you took a right turn and headed toward the dressing room. An instant or so before is me starting down those steps, head down, some kind of cap on, not a baseball cap, my face in shadows, still smiling and happy because the band sounded good. Everybody was playing well, and we sounded energy loud, but not volume loud. The energy and adrenaline had not pushed tempos up and over the point where my smile was remembered rather than genuine. And I was already assembling and arranging the order of tunes we would do in the second show. This was a useless process, to be sure, because I would not decide more than the first 2 or 3 songs with certainty. The after begins on the stairs with someone holding my arm and guiding me sightless past murmuring fans who had swallowed their cheers and perhaps even forgotten them as I had. I was totally blind, and I remember what I could not see. Maybe I remember not being able to see. No, this was not a reach for any closer relationship with Stevie. The blindness that I experienced struck me like lightning, but without the electrical burns or the flash of light. I was there, but not there, and treated that way by the time my guide and I reached the dressing room and I was led to a chair. I collapsed into it and sat up as though posture was important. I heard myself being spoken about, actually around and about, because I was referred to in the third person as if I wasn't there. The voice I most remember after in the dressing room was Bernard Dixon, the road manager the band members called Sweet Pea because he liked to wear a Sweet Pea type sailor's hat. The dressing room filled and emptied a couple of times with band members and the curious drifting about until someone closed the door to the hallway. I didn't know where I was sitting in the room, but from time to time, people briefly took the chairs around me, next to me. No one talked to me. Band members were collecting their gear, discussing how they were going to get back to the hotel. I felt as though I was sitting in a corner facing a wall. Bernard opened the door to leave to collect the money, minus the tickets that were refunded, from the producer. When he opened the door, my ex-wife Brenda came in. It was good to hear her voice. She sounded kind of solicitous, her voice as soft as ever. I was no longer alone. I was comforted by her being there. She was organizing my things, packing my bag, asking questions, collecting the key to my hotel room from Bernard. I had not gone by the hotel before the show. I was suddenly aware that no one had been talking to me because no one really had known what to say. I was tempted to try a reassuring smile, but I still felt like I was facing a wall, and I really didn't have any idea what was happening to me, why I was blind, why I didn't otherwise feel bad, just sort of stunned. Nothing like this had ever happened to me, and the more important question, I imagine, was how long my condition was going to last. But, as I said, I was stunned, feeling extremely naked and exposed. Because I was at a loss for words, and because the most important questions had not occurred to me. Brenda said she was going to get her car and pull up to the door nearest the dressing room in about 10 minutes. Bernard came back in talking to someone else about the money. He told me that the gate receipts were not straight yet, so it was going to take a few more minutes before he could collect everyone and pay them. I reminded him again, uselessly, to write everything down and to get a receipt, and to apologize for me. I was kind of vague about what the apology should consist of because I didn't know what the hell was wrong. Band members who hadn't left yet were drifting back in, still speaking about me as though I was somewhere else. Like, how is he? I ignored questions not put directly to me. Bernard led me out of the door and into Brenda's car. She and I had been formally divorced in 1987. Oddly enough, I received the documents which had been filed by her brother at Blues Alley, but she and I had been separated long before that, and she and Gia moved back to Don Miguel Drive, her mother's place, at the end of 1984. Of all the locations in Los Angeles, I enjoyed myself most of all there on Don Miguel Drive. What's more, of all the people I met and got to know in Southern California, my favorite was Mrs. Elvira Sykes, Brenda's mother. There was no complicated reason. She was simply one of the most sympathetic, pleasant, and direct women I'd ever met. And perhaps I met her at a time when those qualities were so thoroughly lacking from my life. Maybe it had to do with my impression of Los Angeles, but I didn't think that made it wrong. Impressions in Los Angeles were not to be equated with wrong. As a rule, I found first impressions to be without merit. Maybe that's because of who I am and the way scattered rumors and a sprinkling of my attempts at art had created a persona that did not inspire initial honesty of an unguarded introduction, free of pretensions. But that's not so in L.A., or at least was not so in the L.A. of the 1970s and 1980s. There I found that a first impression was valid because it was all there was to most people until they found the role they should play to maximize their association with someone after, "How do you do?" There was nothing until this stranger decided whether you could be used and for what. If the reputation I had amassed was acknowledged at all, it was only in passing, a blink and a slight shift in their focus, like the faint echo of a ring made by pressing the plus key on a cash register. Everybody in L.A. was an actress, an actor, a singer whose megastardom was assured by the demo they just recorded, the screen test they were up for, the commercial they were auditioning for. Only established players, large or small stars, could afford to have a personality or genuine interest in anybody else. Mrs. Elvira Sykes was the second member I met of a previous generation of Brenda's family. I met her grandmother first, her father's mother, from Shreveport, Louisiana. I met her on the weekend while I was playing at the Roxy, and Kareem first brought Brenda over and introduced us. If her grandmother had still been at Brenda's apartment on Cahuenga Boulevard, I might have asked to go there from Club Lingerie. I believe Mama Sykes might have helped me. Instead, the spirits helped me. The second show had been canceled. Not good. I calculated the lost income in my head, accompanied by clip-clopping. It sounded like someone on horseback was trapped inside my skull and couldn't find an exit. Shod hooves clip-clopping in cadence around the statue of Ulysses S. Grant, and the blind guy sitting there on a bench. I only remember one question that Brenda asked during that short ride to the Franklin Hotel. She asked me where I had gotten the sweatsuit I was wearing. That's how I remembered the Porsche. Gia's godfather, Dr. Stevie Rosenthal, had provided the means for me to get to lingerie on time. his brand new Porsche was still parked on Sunset across the street from the club. I was only awake for a few minutes in my hotel room before I collapsed face down on the bed and was out like a light. Before my exit, I gave the keys to the car to Brenda. She retrieved the car and returned it. I often credit the spirits with things I cannot righteously credit any other way. On the morning after the lingerie show, the spirits returned my sight. That probably sounds and reads as scattered as anything I've written here. Why? Because people might ask, if these spirits returned your sight, why did they take it in the first place? That seems like another road to the Lord works in mysterious ways. But I'm not trying to go there, although I'm sure he does. I believe I know what blew me out on those stairs. No sweat. Wearing a sweatsuit on stage that I had put on for an entirely different purpose that had nothing to do with working out and building up the necessary sweat. I had spent the 90 minutes leading up to my stroke inside a hot place working hard enough to be drenched on a normal night. I allowed myself to become dehydrated, and I now equate my stroke coming off stage to some kind of heat stroke episode, a short circuit that could have inflicted more lasting evidence of its influence than it did. It took my sight. My sight was restored, but it left its signature, a long-range reminder of its potential and my mortality. It marked me in a place where I could not forget the circumstances that created it. On the right side of my face, it marked the cheek with a wrinkling, folding effect that takes hold of my expression at times like someone prematurely yanking down a Venetian blonde at an awkward angle. It also warned me because it occasionally slurred my speech, and as it adjusted aspects of me, it left me unaware. I heard about it before I heard it. I don't particularly know why I sat blind, feeling as though I had disrupted a kindergarten class and been sentenced to face the wall, responding more or less mechanically with my voice sounding like it carried a new echo that attached itself randomly to words, but it was a Sunday night, sliding toward midnight, and there was nowhere to go that sounded better than the hotel. 43. It was New York City, 1999, and I was finally being permitted into the apartment I had shared with my mother at the time of her death. The first time I was allowed to enter, months after her funeral, I got lost at the threshold of my mother's deserted, dust-choked apartment. I ignored the young, brown-skinned security guard assigned to me by the manager of the complex. We walked down the hallway to the living room, where he sat with a magazine as I returned and settled stiffly on her unmade bed in the bedroom nearest the front door. I got up without any defined place to start a review of our belongings in this place filled with her absence. I felt like a burglar rummaging through her dresser drawers full of her underclothes, stockings, and pantyhose, thin spring blouses and sweaters, and a top drawer assortment of small unnamed lotions, hair clips and pins, hair nets and rollers, a small plastic bag with extra eyeglasses of varied prescriptions. This carry-all of glass and plastic came to represent the fierce indignity of death, which leaves even a dedicated fixture of the Sunday services on Park Avenue and 86th Street without defense against any stranger's avaricious exploration. Before I could reason against it, I felt ugly drops of salt and rage twisting their way down my cheeks, away from my red eyes. I wondered, without the strength to generate anger, whether the young brother in our living room had heard me crying as I wiped my face with a Kleenex. On legs locked at the hips without knees, I was a metal man with no more flexibility from forehead to foot than the Tin Man frozen rust rigid in a pose speaking of unfulfilled intentions. In the empty attic that was my mother's son's head, I saw that her direct moments of criticism protected me from more flaws than the obvious selfish one that she once handed me so plainly that I was aggravated by her clarity. I had always enjoyed and even taken a vicarious pride in her understated handling of all comers through our lives together, and I was not spared entirely. I was reminded of how her jabs carried more hurt than the telegraphed roundhouse rights from celebrated bigwigs of the entertainment world. Their cotton candy excursions into colloquialisms showed more evidence of the harm my sorties against their character and integrity had done than they could respond to in kind. Her observations, delivered without elevated volume or aura of discovery, brought a lasting sharpness that left no visible bruise on me but smuggled a bone-deep ache past my skin with a package of denotations that would fracture my facade of unaffected nonchalance, and delivered without malice. The pain of the truth was not permanent when it spoke to a fault we did not or could not correct. When I did not, I arrogantly proclaimed that it was because the spirits supplied me with what I needed and pointed out a debilitating generosity that belied or balanced selfish. When I could not, I admitted that I didn't know how and told myself I was raised by Lily Scott. But so was my mother. I am a refugee from the College of Clowns who was too impatient to wait for graduation day, which would have included a speech by a previous inmate who was released with honors at the top of his class. Had I waited, I would have heard his warning. So I just thought I was funny, and that funny would fix everything, change every flat tire, arguably without even stopping. No time on the side of the road. There were no clown escape hatches that occurred to me now, paralyzed and immobile in my mother's room. I was repulsed by my lifelong insistence on fucking isolation. Some of it has been justified by a real fear of the consequences awaiting those who befriended me and drew close, tried to settle within an umbrella's ceiling of cover. When I was younger, everything in life was an experiment and a new thrill. On a rainy day, you could find the high-end joy of another body, another soul, squeezing shoulder to shoulder, giggling, sharing warmth deliberately, two midgets who gallop on marionette legs, now jammed in a space that posed a challenge for one. I loved that kind of silliness, but life has taught me that I have to avoid that kind of close. There was no one I could be close to now. Real grief had overwhelmed my body's working parts. All of these little parts of my mother and her day-to-day stability were rising up from where they were left for the night months ago. They had been expecting her, and I am not her. But they know me because I had been around, fretting when they came for her before the ones with the IVs and the stretchers. It was obviously my fault that she wasn't here to resume whatever they were doing that was left to be continued. When I walked around without purpose and then stopped to cry, they became annoyed and started to move on their own. When I saw them move, I called for the guard and told him it was time to go. I am honestly not sure how capable I am of love, and I'm not sure why. The older I get, the more I tend to question the elements of emotion and intimacy as genetic parallels with height and hair color. I truly believe that I love my mother and grandmother, but beyond them, I have lived in a circle of small values that have a startlingly limited reach, and a stunted amount of emotion is attached to it. This is not an evaluation that builds a wall around my family, closing out other people. It reflects the fact that I am closer to people I know, but no closer to cousins and aunts and uncles than to good friends. I have been blessed with 3 children. They have been blessed with beautiful mothers and touched with brushes of eccentricity donated by a father who could have done more for them and with them, but could not have loved them more, because he did not have enough practice. I am sure I was loved by the Scotts. I am sure I was loved by Lily Scott and Bobby Scott, and probably by my precise and proper uncle, William Scott, and to a lesser extent by Sammy and Gloria Scott, my spinster aunts who slipped into their spinsterhood from the North and South poles of their status. The key to the Scotts was understanding, and what you didn't understand, you had to trust. Love was not an active verb in my family or in my life. There were few demonstrations, few hugs and embraces, and few declarations among us about love. I was a full-grown adult who had been married, a father, and divorced before I consciously put "I love you" into conversations with my mother, before I made sure I got a hug from her and gave her a big hug each time we met. I can't remember ever hearing "I love you" pass between the generations of Scots that preceded me, or recall with any clarity hearing those words from them to me, or being inspired to say those words to them. Yet I can't imagine there being more warmth and laughter shared with genuine empathy and respect and consideration, but not affection. Our codes and slang terms that slip easily in and out of vogue go from addition to meaningful exchanges of emptiness and impotence rather quickly as people and music and movies and what means what to us and each other goes in and out of style in the blink of an eye. Right now, everybody is using the ill-suited "be there for you" or "be there for me." That expression was perfect for the Scots, because if there was one thing you could count on, it was the fact that we would be there for each other. 100 times more likely to be there wherever there was than to say "I love you" and share a genuine hug. And I say that as someone who wished for a hug and a word of encouragement on 1,000 nights when tired and beat up by the world. I would have traded 100 be-theres for one heartfelt hug. And it may be that I never get another chance to say this to those children, as well as I know I have never taught them by example so that they can turn to each other for this when they need it. I hope there is no doubt that I loved them and their mothers as best I could. And if that was inevitably inadequate, I hope it was supplemented by their mothers, who were all better off without me.
Gil Scott-Heron, The Last Holiday, Context of White Supremacy. Next week we will do Frantz Fanon, Cowbell, Wretched of the Earth. But This week, we'll wrap up Gil Scott-Heron, and folks have commentary 641-715-3640. The code 564943#. Press *6 if you would like to participate. Once again, these are final thoughts. Again, Gil Scott-Heron, and he actually passed away in 2011. Again, this book was published in 2012. So this was a posthumous publication. I think we've had more than one of those on the program. And in the notes, I thought it was important. In the notes, the publisher writes, Gil's death in May of 2011 has made it impossible to ask him questions that we would dearly love to know the answers to. The manuscript he left had been sent to me in a very piecemeal fashion over a number of years and written on various archaic typewriters and computers. From countless conversations we had and from certain notes he left, it was clear that his original vision for the book was not as a straight chronological narrative, but as time went by, Gil leaned towards a simpler approach and dispensed with the more complex structure. He also decided to write about some very personal events from the latter part of his life, including the death of his mother and the stroke he suffered in 1990, and his estranged relationships with his 3 children. These were never part of the original plan, and they add real poignancy to the concluding chapters of the book. And they include other details. Just thought that was really important to some of the points that we've raised throughout the book, that I myself have raised and others, that how this book was put together, so that might help explain why we don't get extra details. They didn't get a chance to ask some of the questions that maybe we wanted to ask about what happened in Boston, and to kind of fill that in, and some of the other spots in the book that might help explain. I suspect that might completely answer some of the gaps in the book. But that's it. Folks who dialed in, if you have any final comments you want to get in, Gil Scott-Heron's The Last Holiday. Folks with a hand up, line should be open. Please do not wait until the last minute if you think you have commentary. Much obliged. Mr. Demery 4, retired firefighter in Florida. Your lines are open, hang tight. The caller 3637. Did you have commentary? 3637.
Oh, thank you so much for taking my call. May I be heard?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. Caller from the 712 here. Yeah, it was a book with lots of information about Mr. Heron. I didn't know anything about his work until I started listening to this show, and I was listening to his works, and I really enjoyed them. But all I can find is the live. I can find a lot of live performances, but I don't know. I think I heard you saying something about that too in the beginning. You asked a question about something about how do we feel about Mr. Heron feeling so upset about John Lennon's death. And I can remember in that reading where, he even telling the story about how his grandmother cried about one of the presidents, and I wouldn't feel sad about it. I didn't know much about John Lennon, but talking about putting my head down and crying about it, I wouldn't. But that's me. I got a lot of information, like I said, on this book. Found out that Mr. Heron was raised by his grandmother, which is the case with a lot of black people. His father went to England or somewhere in Europe to play soccer, so he wasn't able to be around him. And then also his mother he wasn't able to be around her either. Found out that Gil Scott-Heron was a victim of gentrification, I guess you would call it, when the highway came through. And I know a lot of people that's a victim of that. Other stuff, I apologize. I'm here at work. I'm here at work every night around this time, so I'm not able to write notes down or jot notes down. But I thought it was an interesting read, and I got introduced to some constructive music. This man made a lot of constructive music, which kind of makes me, I don't know, I kind of question. I mean, and I believe callers was asking earlier in the readings too, for him to make, you know, a constructive music, Whitey on the Moon and other cuts by him that I heard. And then it still seems like he was confused about racism, like all of us are. But it was an interesting read, and I want to thank C.O.W.S for introducing me to more music, more constructive music. I'm coming out of non-constructive rap music, so this was great. I got another artist that I can listen to, and thank you for taking my call. I'll mute my line.
Absolutely. Thank you for commenting while being on the job. Workplace racism, no doubt. Um, any Mr. Dimry for retired firefighter, you are both with us as well. Did you all have commentary?
Yes, can I be heard?
Yes, sir.
Okay, yes. My concluding thoughts are that, around the end of the book, it seemed that Gil gave us some insight into his personal life. And just as we suspected, his father was not around. And I had been thinking about the impact that has on a child's life. Even if the father is not the perfect or ideal role model, just the fact that he's present and that there's that family unit, it has enormous impact upon the well-being of the child, the ability to, if he had seen love being demonstrated, his father towards his mother, that may have changed some of the way that he thought about life, and his inability to share love and express love to others or people that was close to him, people that tried to befriend him. It seemed as, that, like you say, a lot of parts of the book was omitted. I didn't know he had a sister. It said when he was talking to Ramal's mother that he hadn't told his brother or his sister. I don't think he even mentioned his sister in this book. If he did, somebody can, correct me on that. But we can see how his isolating, which is a symptom of substance abuse. We don't know exactly, how much or what he was doing. We know that he liked alcohol, and he had made some references to cocaine, and I think he enjoyed smoking marijuana. But all of that, I think the stroke, he would have been about 43, 44 years old. And I mean, that type of thing happens, but it seems like he was too young really to suffer a stroke. But when you don't take care of yourself, you abuse, certain substances, and those gigs he was playing, flying all over the place. And, he gave us a little insight on some of his diet, which wasn't, a healthy diet. I didn't hear anything about any exercise or any hospital visits. It it's just he lived I don't know. I think he said something like a hermit's life. You know, he wished that he had known more of his people, and that I guess his mom was the only person that could really, you know, tell him how it really was, and to let him see himself as being selfish, because the word selfish in itself, you know, people use it sort of loosely, but if you look at selfishness, you know, it can be the root of a lot of character flaws, and we have to guard ourselves against, and we have to really genuinely care about others, and try to tell people, those that you love them, give them a hug, call them sometimes. He knew that he loved his mother and his grandmother, but short of that, the relationships he had, he couldn't honestly say that he loved those people. And Miss Skypes, Brenda Skypes, she looked like she was, like he said, she was there for him, because they were either divorced or separated when he had the stroke, but she came to his aid and made sure he was all right. I think that was noteworthy, and he had a pretty good friend that would loan him his brand new Porsche. So, and knowing that the guy was a substance abuser, that's kind of a stretch, but he mentioned that he was reminded, you know, when he was recovering from his stroke, he was reminded how his mother's jabs carried more hurt than the telegraph roundhouse rights from celebrated bigwigs of the entertainment world. That's the first thing that I noticed that he said about those, what he called them big entertainment world bigwigs, but they're like, I don't know, it's better names than that for them. Those people eat you alive, and I know that during that period of time that he had to be cheated out of a lot of money, and he had to be treated worse than what he put on. We didn't hear anything about Cleve Davis, you know, mistreating him, and none of the other people. I think that also he may have suffered from diabetes later on too, because when you look at the later pictures of him in his life before he passed, his face was starting to have discoloration, pigmentation. The melanin in his skin was fading, you know, which is a sign of diabetes, and he may have been undiagnosed. You know, all people that have diabetes are not overweight. He could have had diabetes as high blood sugar and as low blood sugar. And the low blood sugar is worse than high. And you have to educate yourself on your condition and visit the doctor, do blood work, know what's going on within your own life, and try to take care of yourself. I'm sure if he could do it all over again, he probably would do a few things differently. But all in all, I think he made a contribution to humanity, and he was instrumental in Martin Luther King's birthday becoming a holiday, and just an extraordinary individual. And I enjoyed the book, and I'll be ready for the next one. Thanks, Gus. I mute my line.
Indeed. Thank you, Mr. Demery. Retired firefighter, did you have commentary as well?
Yes, sir. As Mr. Demery was talking, I was just collecting my thoughts, and here goes. Yes, I think Mr. Gil Scott-Heron contributed a great deal with the time that he had. There are some things that are cultured with entertainers, especially entertainers that are musical artists, that it makes it very tough to break the cycle, to be healthy by the hours they keep. And there's a lot of destructive, incorrect things that goes on around in that atmosphere, including mind-altering substances. And if someone escapes without doing that, especially during the time that the long period of time that he was able to do it, it seemed as though, and you can go down the list, that anyone of his caliber who has been that proficient musically, for that long period of time, 10, 20, 30 years or so, that it's very difficult to get through it without having some sort of narcotics habit, and therefore unhealthy situation, and it seemed as though he took victim of that process also, but nevertheless, despite that, he was able to utilize his writing and musical talents to say a lot of things that were constructive, and in turn put action in other means to what his thoughts were. There certainly is nothing wrong with recognizing another non-white individual who literally risked his or her life with the idea and attempt to solve the problem of racism and white supremacy. In this case, I'm specifically talking about the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, to give acknowledgement, and in turn for a generation of people who was not even alive during the time he was on the planet alive, they would also be able to get introduced to him, and Mr. Gil Scott-Heron played a part in that, and so I think that was important. There were some other thoughts that I had also. With the structure of the biography, I consider me to be like a traditionalist, I guess. I would have rather it for it to be more on a write down the list type of thing from year to year, and that sort of thing, in a much more clearer way. But I suspect, being that the book, as I think I heard, came in bits and pieces, that probably hurt that in a way. And also, I would say it's probably difficult for someone to write about themselves, because there may be some parts about themselves that they're not so much, maybe kind of reluctant to let everybody know about, for one thing. And I can see that, from that standpoint. And so that may have played a part in it also. The last but not least, the biggest thing that I'm thinking about with an artist that have had such a long period of time of arranging sounds and lyrics and ultimately music, on who controls that now at his death. Maybe I missed it during the course of the book, but I'm talking about presently, right now, because that's and who it is the children that he mentions about. Are they getting something from that? Or whatever he may have wrote out on how he would want it to go, is that being granted? I would be surprised if it's not. I put it that way. Maybe somebody else will help with the answer on that. And looking forward to the next reading. Although I know because I think I read it before, it's going to be one where you really got to focus when you're reading anything that Frantz Fanon puts out. But enjoyed it. That's all.
Appreciate that, retired firefighter. Let's see if any other folks have commentary. Please do not wait till the last moment. We have about 10 minutes left in the broadcast. Some of the final notes that I took. Let's see. I thought his session, and I can completely agree, retired firefighter, when he said about Gil Scott-Heron's isolation and his difficulty writing about himself and sharing some of this information. I can attest, as a writer, yes, it can be very challenging to write about yourself. I know for me, I only had a small portion in the most recent piece that I wrote, a very small portion where I had to interject myself in the story, and it was a struggle just for that. Like, we're talking enough to write 2 sentences. It was a struggle. So I know that can be very, very challenging, even for people who, do a lot of writing. But the portion where he says, I am honestly not sure how capable I am of love, and I'm not sure why. The older I get, the more I tend to question the elements of emotion and intimacy as genetic parallels with height and hair color. I truly believe that I love my mother and grandmother. Beyond that, beyond them, I have lived in a circle of small values that have a startlingly limited reach, and a stunted amount of emotion is attached to it. And he talks about not being close to a lot of other people. I think that happens a lot in the system of white supremacy. In fact, remembering the legend Dr. Frances Cress Welsing, when she talks about pool, I think the goal, much like in pool, you want to get the non-white people, balls, if we're talking billiards, you want to get them isolated. It's much easier to attack when you can just get them isolated. You don't have a strong support system and other people who are concerned about your well-being. Even something as simple as you have other people who are around you. Hey, Gil, I know you don't like to take care of yourself. We're going to go work out today. We're going to go do, walk at the track or do something. We're going to go take a hike. What have you been eating? Stop by. We're going to eat today. I'm going to make sure we're going to eat dinner today. I'm going to make it. Just that alone can have a huge impact. The same way that he talked about those hugs. If it's not just a hug, but I got you some fruit. I know you don't eat well. You were eating those cheeseburgers. I saw you. I brought you some fresh fruit. Making sure you got water. Put that soda down. I got you some. Just that. Huge impact in your quality of life, your life expectancy in terms of how long you live, and just your well-being. And racists, they do a phenomenal job. They do a phenomenal job at totally disrupting that. I mean, they got a million different weapons and spend midnight oil, as Mr. Fuller said, thinking up more to just keep us in conflict, isolated. So it's just you. And then they'll say, we know you're hurting. Here's a bottle or whatever you need. Here's a syringe. Here's some cigarettes. We got you so you can feel a little bit better. The portion where he says, you already got that about wishing a hug. The portion where he says, right at the end, the last portion of the book where he says, and if that was inadequate, let me go back and read the whole thing, make sure I don't mess it up. And it may be that I never get another chance to say this to those children, as well as I know I have never taught them by example, so that they can turn to each other for this when they need it. I hope there is no doubt that I love them and their mothers as best I could, and if that was inevitably inadequate, I hope it was supplemented by their mothers, who were all better off without me. I thought that was when he was talking about John Lennon, and he said when they made the announcement, it was like a punch in the gut. That being the concluding sentence to this book was like a punch in the gut for me. Like, I literally brought tears to my eyes, like reading that, like, wow, that is the conclusion for a book published 1 year after his death, that the mother of his children, maybe even presumably his children, would be better off without him. Like, Wow, that is completely devastating. And again, racism, white supremacy, that's the goal. That's what all of this is designed to produce, where even somehow they're so successful that we end up internalizing all of that. I think we talked about this. We talked about this a lot, but we end up somehow internalizing a lot of that, sometimes all of it, and thinking that it's something defective about us, as opposed to, no, we are victims of white supremacy. That's not saying that we did everything correct, but just we're in a total system that's designed to make sure I'm not able to function and be the best possible person I can be, best person that I want to be. Everything about this is set up to make sure that I am a complete failure at that. And I mean, wow, to have this be his assessment at the end of his life, like, wow, that is the system of white supremacy. We had listeners who wrote additional commentary. First person, I'm finding it difficult to comment on this book. Not sure if it's because I'm not listening closely or I'm confused by what he's saying. From the faculty and children at the school not being racist, we talked about that at the beginning of the book, when probably only because I'm studying the nature of white people, it is quite clear to me, to the disciplinary action against him for playing the piano, actual piano playing, not banging on the keys to destroy the instrument, to the way the faculty and children responded to him, and and the placing their reaction to him on himself, saying it's basically his fault for not being in the school earlier, where the children and faculty could have gotten to know him better. Even in that, leaving out so much information, you do not really get his true experience in the school. This is probably where he learned to look for white approval and acceptance, which is a theme throughout the book. As you mentioned, Gus, this book was published after his death, so the editors could have arranged it that way. Gil mentioned his first encounter with Clive Davis and spoke to the electric power that he sensed coming from this person. It seems to me that Clive not only recognized non-white talent, but also recognized the mind-altering substances his artists indulged in. It wouldn't surprise me if he encouraged their use of the substance. Whitney Houston, CeeLo Green, Big Boy, etc. come to mind when hearing Clive's name. It was nice to hear about non-white people getting together to help out Joan Little. We talked about way earlier in the book, black female. She stabbed and killed a police officer, I believe, in North Carolina, who was trying to rape her. It might have been South Carolina. I think it was South Carolina. Moving forward, what would the reaction be if entertainers of today would do a benefit concert to help out families of non-white males who were murdered by law enforcement? As was said by a number of callers, Gil was very humble. He did not take himself too seriously and seemed to downgrade his contribution to the world of entertainment and activism. He could, however, be counted on to express himself glowingly when speaking of others. It is unfortunate that his book was released after his death. It probably would have been a better read had he had the chance to review it. Gil had health issues at the end of his life, and maybe the last holiday had a different meaning for him, having nothing to do with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. That's just my opinion. I could be wrong. The other person who wrote in, one of our listeners in Wisconsin, it's sad to hear that Gil Scott-Heron thought that his children and their mothers were better off without him. I wonder, did he think that he and his mother were better off with his father? Black fathers matter. Caller in Wisconsin. We have basically 5 minutes. Did anybody have any final comments they wanted to get in? Last 5 minutes. Folks satisfied?
Yes. Yes. If it could be a quick answer, the question I asked about who has in charge of his music. Does anybody know?
Oh, that would be a good question. Who owns the masters? My suspicion is that it's probably not anybody in the Scott family. I can double check to see if I can find anything, but it would be, I mean, if we're going to be wagering, I would have to put a whole lot of nickels on Clive Davis, probably retaining the rights to some of this, some very powerful white people. I would be absolutely stunned if, anybody in his children, anybody in the Scott family is the one getting, money when somebody plays The Revolution Will Not Be Televised.
Right. Yeah, it probably if I listen to enough commercials, it probably be some of his cuts would be on commercials.
It would not surprise me.
That would probably be one that you would, chalk up for Clyde Davis. He probably owned those rights, and I did read some place where his daughter Gia, I believe he had his net worth was about $8 million when he died, and his daughter Gia, it may have been just a media spin, but it was saying that she did not want to share a portion of his inheritance with her half brother, Ramal.
I think somebody said earlier, racists, they do phenomenal work in causing conflict and keeping non-white people just not in unison, harmony with one another. That is an easy one. I think Mr. Fuller's talked about that a lot as well. Just go and dump a whole dump truck of coins amongst the non-white people, and that'll tie up a good few 5-10 years of angst right there, and then we'll, think of something else to get them arguing and in conflict after that's done.
Yep, king children.
Yep, talked about
Hi,
that.
everybody. Can I? Oh, I'm sorry.
Yes, ma'am. Proceed.
Oh, thank you. I just want to know, was I missing something? Because when you got done with the last reading, it sounded like it was about to go into something that happened with his mom. She had a cut on her cheek. Then when it came back to the reading, did I miss something? Did it tell about how she was injured, or why did it sound like a police was there?
No, that was the reading. He went there. That's why I asked the question about, what do we think happened? Mr. Demerford, I thought, gave very logical assessment of him. She had not been taking good care of herself with the whole diabetic issue. But no, it did not pick up to give, more information about what was happening with her. Chapter 41, it goes right to February 1989, Blues Alley, picking up from there, nothing to do with mom. And that, again, that's the publisher said this was published after his death, piecemeal, written over years, so that's what you end up with.
And for the little child that read the speech that he wrote, I wonder who gave him a copy that was badly faded. And if this was after segregation and he had a white teacher, a white female teacher, I mean, could this person did something like this on purpose to try to jam up the whole event? Like, I'm going to give this child some paper that he can't hardly read, even though he wrote the speech. He still needed the paper, but then Miss Diana Ross got up there and gave him some encouragement, and he was able to finish it. But that's interesting. I'd like to know how he got that badly faded lithograph copy of his speech.
That would be interesting to know. I'm sure they might have some information on this person's name in the papers. I'm sure Jet Ebony would have covered this rally from the 1980s. If folks have a good library, good university, college library in your town, or if you're in D.C., you can go to the Library of Congress and check out and see if they maybe have this person's name. They might have more information on what he might even still be alive. You can talk to him directly and get his reflections on what happened. I did also want to make sure I got in as well, since they announced this week that Arizona Senator John McCain has brain cancer. John McCain is one of the suspected race soldiers that Stevie Wonder and Gil Scott-Heron and Coretta Scott King were fighting against. He was one of the whites who said, "Oh no, we're not going to give this nigger MLK a holiday. Are you crazy? What a disgrace. We're not going to." That was one right there. While everybody, that might even be another example where people do a lot of hand wringing and, "Oh, John McCain, oh, Senator, miss him so much." Yeah, just make sure folks remember this was one of the folks who said, "Oh no, we're not going to do this MLK holiday." Anything else folks need to get in, or we satisfied?
Don't forget Jeff Sessions.
Oh, yep. Another one. It was a whole lot of them. It was a whole lot of who are still around, and I think even John McCain did some tacky My bad, I've changed my opinion, and, mea culpa, I was wrong. I should have been supportive. I love Dr. King now, but it was a whole lot of them. That's one that should be kept in mind this here week. Anything else, folks? Satisfied? Right on. We'll be here. We'll be here tomorrow, 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific, compensatory call-in. We'll catch up on news from the past 7 days, John McCain brain cancer, and other things that happened. Tune in. We'll be looking forward to hearing commentary from folks. If you have suggestions, commentary, problems, if you are having difficulty finding something in the archives, drop an email untiljustice@gmail.com. Again, we're doing Frantz Fanon, Wretched of the Earth. I suspect that should be kind of easy to find. That's such a popular title. They should have that. I guess if you're in a more rural area, it might be difficult at the public library, but if you're in a major city, I don't think you'll have too much trouble getting your hands on Wretched of the Earth. It's probably online. I haven't looked for like PDF or what have you, but I'm pretty sure that book is so popular. Whites love that book. It's at a lot of colleges. So if you have trouble finding it, let me know, but I cannot imagine too many folks, if you want a hard copy, should be at your fingertips. With that, thanks for everyone tuning in. If some people got introduced to Gil Scott-Heron's catalog of music, great. It is massive. A lot of great tunes that directly talk about racism. That's it. And if anything, we can learn from Gil Scott-Heron. Sobriety would be best. I do not think being under the influence of alcohol, cocaine, cigarettes, cannabis, that's at least the stuff that I'm remembering from the text that was mentioned. There may have been other substances as well, but I don't think any of that helped Gil Scott-Heron feel any better. I don't think any of that helped him be a better writer, and I don't think any of that contributed to his health and well-being. In fact, those substances likely contributed to him passing away in 2011 and having poor quality of life because of his health issues. That's just one major reason. In addition to, I think, the automobile crash in the book where it seemed like alcohol could have also been an issue. There is just a variety of different things that came out throughout the book. Arguments with other black people where they're drinking, and seems like you might have a whole room of alcoholics. I think a lot of different motivating reasons from this text alone. Sobriety would be best under conditions of white supremacy. We could have had the bottle playing as we fade out. That said, Creator, we ask that you help us remain patient with other black people, victims of white supremacy. We ask that you help us remain patient with ourselves. Remind us to demonstrate the highest levels of black self-respect at all times, in all places, each and every time we are in contact with another black person. It has been time. Replace white supremacy with justice immediately. Cal signing out. Thanks all for tuning in.
Nigga, you so brainwashed.
I'm a victim, brother.
Problem. You're a victim.
I'm a victim of 400 years of conditioning.
Shut up.
The man has programmed my conditioning. Even my conditioning has been conditioned.